it's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mette Aadahl, who is Professor of Physiotherapy and Rehabilitation. You have a long history at our center and with our data, and Mette will today talk about physical inactivity and sedentarism. Thank you, Mette.
Thank you. And this one is forward? Yeah. And which one is backwards? This one is backwards. Thank you very much, and congratulations to the Glostrup population studies, and thank you for being invited to be part of this celebration. I'm sure you all know that physical inactivity is a well-established modifiable risk factor for major chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And actually, information on physical activity, physical inactivity has been collected in the Glostrup population studies since 1964. I wasn't around in Glostrup at that time, so in this presentation I'm going to focus on the last 25 years, because I was also asked to talk about sedentary behavior, which was not a thing back in 1964. But just to get the definition right here, it's important to know that there's a distinction between physical inactivity and sedentary behavior. Physical inactivity is usually operationalized as a failure to adopt the physical activity guidelines. That means that you have a physical activity level below the recommended levels. Whereas sedentary behavior is defined as any waking behavior characterized by a very low energy expenditure while in a sitting or reclining position. So that's sedentary behavior is what the person here on the picture is doing. And what you can also see is that, I just have to find out here, is that watching TV has a metabolic equivalent value of 1. And a metabolic equivalent value of 1 corresponds to the resting metabolic rate. So you have a very, very low energy expenditure when you're sitting still. You can see if you're sitting reading or playing cards or even sitting working on a PC, you have a slightly higher energy expenditure. But sedentary behavior is what I'm going to be focusing on here. And I'll take you back a little bit, but mainly give you some examples of some of the research here over the years. The type of information that has been collected in the Glostrup population studies has evolved with the growing body of evidence on physical activity and health. And back in 1964, this information was collected by questionnaire, very often focusing on vigorous physical activity, sports and exercise, and sometimes in some of the cohorts, rather crude questions where people were asked to categorize themselves into one of 4 categories as very active or moderately active or slightly active or inactive. Some of the cohorts did, in addition, also have measures of cardiorespiratory fitness. The 1914 cohort in 74, I think at least, they also measured cardiorespiratory fitness. But since Inter 99, around 25 years ago, we also started using some of these device-based measures of physical activity in small, or to begin with, very small subgroups of participants in these studies. And as you could see, we have used different types of device-based measurements, so-called accelerometers, until today, the latest study, the 20-year follow-up of the Inter 99 study, where we've used this relatively new SENSE monitor for measuring physical activity and sedentary behavior, sleep, and so on. But this gives us a completely different and improved measure for physical activity and sedentary behavior. We can explore it in much more detail and in a way that the questionnaires do not allow us to do. Questionnaires are still important because there are some things that you cannot measure by the devices. You don't know if you're active at work or at home or during leisure time or so on. So we still need the questionnaires, but we have these device-based measures also now. Also, to put it sort of the development since 1964 into perspective, I've taken this figure of how the public health guidelines on physical activity have developed over the years. And back in 74, which is, sorry, I did it again, here, pre-1980, there were no global public health guidelines on physical activity. The American Heart Association had some guidelines, but they solely focused on exercise and training for performance. So there was a recommendation on vigorous physical activity. You should do sports, you should exercise. But then a number of epidemiological studies from back then actually showed that there was some importance also in everyday physical activity, moderate intensity physical activity, and there was you can almost call it a shift in paradigm here with the Centers of Disease Control recommendations in 1995, where they suddenly stressed the importance of physical activity for health, and also the importance of moderate physical activity. Suddenly it was not so important to be vigorously physically active, to do exercise, and so you could achieve a lot health-wise if you were physically active at a moderate level. And we still have these guidelines up till today. Also, the latest guideline from WHO came in 1920, and they focus on both moderate and vigorous physical activity, but also on sedentary behavior and the importance of doing muscle strength exercise also. And this is all based on studies and evidence that have emerged during these years. As you may know, these are the guidelines from 2020. We have the moderate intensity physical activity, the vigorous intensity, the muscle strengthening twice a week. And also importantly, it's actually for the first time now stated in the guidelines that you should limit your amount of sedentary behavior and replace sedentary, especially long periods of sedentary behavior, with more physical activity. Even physical activity with light intensity is better than sitting still for long periods of time. And this is all based on the evidence that lies before these guidelines, and luckily we've been also contributed to some of this in the Glostrup population studies, to some of this evidence. First of all, back when this change in focus from exercise and vigorous physical activity to more moderate physical activity, we realized that some of the questionnaires, the measurements we had for physical activity were not adequate for us to explore all intensity levels and to explore sedentary behaviors. So we developed this new questionnaire. This new questionnaire that was based on a 24-hour approach to movement behavior, so that it included sleep and sedentary behavior. It distinguished also between work and leisure time sitting, and that gave us an opportunity to have a much more detailed picture. Here you see number of hours on an average weekday spent on sleep and sitting at work and so forth, so that we could get a much more detailed picture of people's movement behaviors. And it also allowed us to explore, for instance, the association between specific behaviors such as sitting down watching TV in relation to various health aspects, as here cardiovascular biomarkers. And here's another example, and that's from the Health 2006 study, where Madina Saic, in her PhD, looked both cross-sectionally and longitudinally on the association between sitting at work or sitting during leisure time, and various health markers. Here she looked at cardiorespiratory fitness, and here she looked at systolic blood pressure. And as you can see, there's a strong and significant association here with leisure time sitting and cardiorespiratory fitness. These are the number of hours sitting per day. And likewise, a very strong and significant association also with a number of hours sitting per day and systolic blood pressure, whereas there was no such association with work. And I should say that these are, of course, adjusted for relevant confounders. Yeah. So those are some of the studies that we did on sedentary behavior. But we also wanted to find out, okay, so we have all this epidemiological evidence, but can we actually make people reduce their sedentary behavior and achieve some improvements in their health? And therefore, we conducted this RCT study. We nested it in the Health 2010 study, and we wanted to investigate the effect of an individualized face-to-face motivational counseling intervention aimed at reducing daily sitting time, and to see if it could improve anthropometric measures and cardiometabolic markers among sedentary men and women. So we invited 166 sedentary men and women from the Health 2010 study, and we randomized them into a control group that had they were just told to go home and live as they normally did. And then they had a session, counseling session after the study was finalized. But the intervention group received 4 individual motivational counseling sessions over the next 6 months, and they were performed by some of the nurses in the Glostrup population studies. And then after those 6 months, we did the follow-up measurements on accelerometers, and they were given questionnaires, and they had a thorough health examination again. And what we found was that after these 6 months, we saw a reduction in daily sitting time of 20 minutes per day. Unfortunately, it wasn't a significant change, but we also saw a reduction in waist circumference and serum insulin and insulin resistance. So there was a slight effect of reducing sedentary behavior in everyday life. Yeah. So what are we doing now? Where are we heading right now? And as I mentioned before, the 20-year follow-up of the Inter-99 study has just terminated the data collection, and I'm involved in 2 studies here, 2 sub-studies, one on sarcopenia and one on diet, physical activity, and glucose monitoring, together with Kirsten Bjørnsbo. And Allan Lindeberg and Allan Våg are primary investigators of this study. And here we want to focus on different aspects of physical activity in relation to various aspects. Since the cohort is now between 50 and 80 years old, it is becoming interesting to see how for instance, how their lifetime physical, or at least their the last 20 years of behavior, not just with respect to physical activity, also diet and other behaviors, how that has affected their muscle strength, muscle mass, physical function, which becomes increasingly important as these participants age. So other perspectives with these data that we wish to look into, it's the technological development or advancements means that we have still increasingly better measurements of physical activity. It's an advantage, of course, because it gives us new opportunities, but with cohort studies, it's also a challenge, because it means sometimes that you change your measurements over time, which is never, everyone knows that's not a very good idea if you want to compare over time. But we have to keep up with it, and with the measurements today, we're able to measure larger and larger groups of people, so that we can, instead of just measuring very small subgroups, we can use these measurements in thousands of people, which is definitely an advantage. And also we have this opportunity to explore everything in a 24-hour perspective. So instead of just looking at physical activity or inactivity as we used to do, we can look at all the different aspects and some of the very important things that our research focus on right now is sleep. You know, what does it mean if you have short sleep duration or long sleep duration, and what does screen time mean specifically? And also we're interested in what we call WILPA, which stands for Vigorous Intensity Leisure Time Physical Activity. Very short bouts of physical activity. If you use 90 seconds running up the stairs, there's some recent studies that indicate that there may be a health effect of that also. So these measurements allows us to look into this. And finally, what I mentioned before, the muscles, the physical function, and the aging is very interesting in relation to the inter-99 20-year follow-up. So I just want to say thank you very much, and especially thank you to Torben Jørgensen and to Ellen Lindeberg for allowing me to be part of the Glostrup family for more than 20 years now. Thank you.